Welcome to ChiroSphere, where we talk about all things chiropractic and some things not so chiropractic. I'm Dr. Ray Foxworth, your host for ChiroSphere and CEO of ChiroHealth USA, the network that works for chiropractic. Today, I'm really honored to introduce you to Dr. Carl S. Cleveland III, a distinguished figure in the chiropractic profession and third president of Cleveland University, Kansas City. His contributions to the chiropractic community extend far beyond his role at Cleveland University. He served as president of the Association of Chiropractic Colleges and the Council on Chiropractic Education, demonstrating his commitment to advancing chiropractic education and standards. With nearly 50 years of experience in chiropractic education, he's a seasoned educator, international lecturer, and prolific author. He continues the tradition of teaching foundations in philosophy and science of chiropractic, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather. And I, as a graduate of Cleveland University, I consider myself fortunate to have been influenced by his teaching as well as his father's. Today, we'll delve into his lifelong dedication to chiropractic education, his leadership in shaping the profession, and his insights into the future of chiropractic care. Welcome, Dr. Cleveland. I am honored to have you here.
My privilege. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, with your family's rich legacy in chiropractic care spanning 4 generations, what inspired you to follow in their footsteps and dedicate your life to chiropractic education?
Some people might be surprised that as a youngster, the last thing I wanted to be was a chiropractor. Because my experience, we didn't take vacations. We went to chiropractic conventions. And we may stop at the Grand Canyon along the way because my father and grandfather were always lecturing at chiropractic events. And because my grandfather, grandmother, and great-grandmother, Dr. Silva Ashworth, were Palmer graduates. Interestingly, I would be dragged up Brady Street Hill there in Davenport, Iowa in August to attend Lyceum. And my father, Dr. Carl Cleveland Jr., and Dr. C.S. Cleveland, my grandfather, were close colleagues of B.J. Palmer, and B.J. was the leader of the International Chiropractic Association at that time. And I remember B.J. as a young child, and there's some interesting stories there, and we may get an opportunity to, if time permits, to talk about that. But let me continue the response to your question. But interestingly, my great-grandmother, Dr. Silva Ashworth, who was a Palmer graduate in 1910, she was the first woman to practice chiropractic in the state of Nebraska. In fact, she organized the Nebraska Chiropractic Association in her living room. Her daughter, Ruth, worked as a chiropractic assistant in the office in Lincoln, Nebraska. And as the story was related to me, Ruth asks her mother, well, take me to the Palmer School. I want to be a chiropractor just like you. And Dr. Silva Ashworth, took her daughter, Ruth Ashworth, to the Palmer School, introduced her to B.J. Palmer, and Ruth Ashworth enrolled. And while she was there, in a class of anatomy, she met a young man, an athlete from Simpson College in Indianola, Iowa. He coached the baseball team at Palmer, and they fell in love. They courted. They were married in B.J. Palmer's home. B.J. gave away the bride, and that young athlete's name was Carl Cleveland. So those were my grandparents, and they met at the Palmer School. And so I had an early connection to the Palmer events because we were there so often for their annual events and then meetings of the International Chiropractic Association. But interestingly, my grandmother, Ruth Cleveland, and her mother, Dr. Silva Ashworth, stayed connected to the leadership of the National Chiropractic Association. At that time, and later in 1963, the NCA became the American Chiropractic Association. In other words, grandfather and father were connected to the ICA leadership. They were on the board of directors. But grandmother and great-grandmother were connected to the NCA, later to become the American Chiropractic Association. In fact, my grandmother, Dr. Ruth Ashworth Cleveland, was the Missouri delegate to the National Chiropractic Association. Now, the significance of that is as a child, I'd go to a Thanksgiving dinner or a holiday event where the family had gathered and we couldn't get past the salads, and they'd be talking about the personalities in the ACA and in the ICA. So I grew up seeing both sides of the debate within the chiropractic profession, and you and many of your listeners know that there are different schools of thoughts and philosophies. But as a child, my goal was to be a zookeeper. I wanted to own a zoo. I was
Yes.
interested in animals. And even through college, my degree was in biology and my major was herpetology. And the herpetology is the study of reptiles and amphibians. In other words, snakes, turtles, and lizards. But I also played piano. And as my grandmother did and as my mother did, and I worked my way through college, undergraduate school, playing piano in nightclubs. And I can remember it well. It was the Baghdad Lounge on 37th and Broadway in the Kansas City area. That was called Midtown or Uptown, part of Kansas City. It was a nice supper club. And it just hit me on a Saturday night. This is when they smoked back in supper clubs back at that time. And I was up there on stage playing the piano and entertaining the guests. And I see this cloud of smoke just hovering in that room. And I got to thinking, I don't want to be 30 years old playing in a nightclub or a supper club. And there wasn't a big market back then. This would have been late 60s, a big market for somebody that collected snakes and lizards. So I thought, well, maybe what mom, dad, and grandparents did wasn't such a bad idea anyway. So I'm going to go to chiropractic college, but I want to go into private practice. I don't want to go into education or administration. Well, man plans and God laughs, as they say, and the rest is history. And
Wow.
my first teaching experience, though, was at the University of Missouri. I was in Kansas City. I was in graduate school and was honored to receive a teaching fellowship. I taught the laboratories in the biology and the anatomy class, which gave me quite a connection to, and I enjoyed that. And so that was my introduction to chiropractic, and no turning back. I'm so happy that I did.
So, as you may recall, my mother and father are both chiropractors, and it never crossed my mind to go do what they did. I had a drug problem as a young child. I was drugged to Parker. I was drugged to state associations. I was drugged to all the meetings of the chiropractors. And so, that was just what my mom and dad did. And so, as I tell folks, I went out and found everything that I did not want to do the rest of my life. And I happened to hear Sig Miller, that I'm sure you know or knew.
A Cleveland graduate.
Yeah. And he spoke at one of the state association meetings, and I happened to go to it. This was as a, I was probably in my 20s then, 24, 25. And I heard him speak. And despite being around chiropractic literally all my life, my mom, all she ever did was either work as a chiropractic assistant and then went to chiropractic college. But it just clicked. It's like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And I'll never forget, the week after that, I went by my parents' house, and I was married at the time and had a 1-year-old son. And I said, what Sig said really resonated with me. I think I'm going to go to chiropractic college. And my dad says, well, have you given a lot of thought? I said, yeah, ever since last weekend. And he said, well, have you saved up any money? And I opened my wallet. I said, yeah, I got $14. And I literally remember calling Cleveland and spoke with Doris Jensen, who was there at that time, and she convinced me that the weather really wasn't that bad in Kansas City. So we loaded up our little Datsun B2, and literally about 3 weeks later, we were on our way to Kansas City. So I often tell folks, I don't know that I chose chiropractic or that it chose me, and I tend to hear that a lot from chiropractors. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is I understand that there's an interesting story about how you became president of the college, and it had something to do with a huge key ring. Can you share that little story with us?
Well, the story simply was that, for the benefit of our listeners, Cleveland founded in 1922 in Kansas City, Missouri. It was founded as a not-for-profit corporation, and it continues as a not-for-profit corporation today. It was founded by my grandfather, Dr. Carl Cleveland Sr., and my grandmother, Dr. Ruth Cleveland, and Dr. P.B. Griffin. They were all Palmer graduates, and started the institution with just 3 students. In 1951, my grandfather took leadership of the Ratledge College of Chiropractic in Los Angeles. And so in my early years, I'd spend, as a child, 9 months in Kansas City and then 9 months in Los Angeles. We'd go back and forth until my education got in the way, because it was difficult pulling me out of schools between Kansas City and Los Angeles. And so my mother and father, Dr. Carl and Mildred Cleveland, who you knew, Dr. Ray, stayed based in Kansas City, but my grandfather stayed based in Los Angeles, and taking leadership of the Ratledge College that was founded in 1911. It then became Cleveland College of Chiropractic in Los Angeles in 1951. And that college grew, as did the Kansas City campus. In the LA campus, there was made a major investment in a real estate facility, beautiful campus at the intersection of Hollywood Freeway and Vermont. And it came to the point where Dr. Andrew Wymore, you may recall the name, he was chairman of the board, and I was a dean at the Kansas City campus. And when it got to the point where my grandfather, Dr. C., who was in his late 70s, needed assistance with this new campus and this major expansion, my mother and father went to Los Angeles under the authority of the Board of Trustees. And Dr. Wymore, on behalf of the board, said, well, Carl, would you step up to be the chief operating officer, chief executive officer? And then later I became president. And I think the story you're referring to is when my father and mother and the moving van moving from Kansas City to Los Angeles, it was out in front of our home and they're here in Kansas City. And I was there to say goodbye to them. My father had this big ring of keys that was on a chain, a key chain, so to speak, a very long chain. Men of that age had key fobs that they would hook to their belt on this long chain that they would pull out so they could reach the lock. And I can remember Dr. Wymore was there too. And we were saying goodbye to my parents because they were moving to LA to be part of leadership of the Cleveland Los Angeles campus. And I distinctively remember my father then took this key fob off of his belt, this big wad of keys, and he just reached up and dropped them in my hand and said, call me when you need me. And
that's called baptism by fire, right?
So it's literally the keys to the college. And of course, this is with the approval of the Board of Trustees.
Yeah.
And, it's been an interesting, people say, well, Carl, why do you come to the campus every day? You're almost 78 years old. Just like your father and his father before him, you teach the introductory principles, philosophy, and science of chiropractic in the first term. Why do you keep doing that? And my why is that every American know and understand and value chiropractic care to the point where they use doctors of chiropractic as a regular part of their spinal health. And just as they would do with dentistry and their family medical profession. And I've seen some tremendous changes over my life. Growing up in a chiropractic family, I've been so blessed to have been part of the debates on the ACA and the ICA. When I came into leadership at Cleveland, Kansas City at the president's level, one of the first things I did was to invite the leadership of the ACA to come on campus, and I invited the leadership of the ICA, International Chiropractic Association, to come on campus, and we started having joint assemblies. In fact, you'll remember as a student in the auditorium that once a month I'd call an all-school assembly, and I'd invite a visiting lecturer. And what made that significant is as we got the leadership of the ACA and the ICA on the stage, so much of the commonality came out about the unifying influences that truly existed within our profession. And so you probably know this, but what I do as president is I enroll our students in first term. When they come in the first week, I enroll them as student members of the International Chiropractors Association and the American Chiropractors Association. And they also have the opportunity to join the American Black Chiropractors Association should they elect to do that. Why? Because I want the students to be informed about the issues. I want them to become activists. So when they graduate, they can step into leadership roles. And Dr. Ray, you took my advice, because one of many goals we had as an institution, one of the many themes we talk about is Cleveland. It's about educating leaders among doctors of chiropractic. And Ray, I know you'd come in my office maybe once or twice a term and we'd talk about chiropractic and about your parents. And then what did you end up being a leader on the state board? And then you were one of the first chiropractors in the VA. And now look at you in your current role and with the Chiropractic Summit. And that's what it's about. It's about activism and getting committed to moving this profession forward.
And it truly, I think a lot of what I do is because of my experiences there. And, we've been part of, and I think I've talked with you about this before, the chiropractic strategic plan. And really the underpinning of that is to try to achieve unity without uniformity. And as part of that plan, there was a survey sent out, and believe it or not, over 4 chiropractors responded to that survey about what they thought was important for the profession and moving forward. And I was truly amazed, like you found, at the level of consensus. And truly, I think if we can begin to focus on really what unites us rather than what divides us, hopefully we can achieve that. So as the president of Cleveland University, I know you've overseen its evolution from, I think, going back from Truce and then where I was on Rock Hill Road. It's now a comprehensive institution encompassing chiropractic and health science education. I know you have several other programs there. What key developments and initiatives have you implemented that really have enhanced the educational experience for students at the university?
There's so many. Where do I start? You're talking about the span of time when we were on the Troost campus to the Rock Hill campus to where we are now in Overland Park, Kansas. On the Kansas side, we were founded in Missouri. The reason for moving to expanding programs beyond chiropractic, it really started back in the concept started in the early 90s. The Council on Chiropractic Education had introduced specific prerequisites in the sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, all with laboratories. And with the support of the faculty, go to the Higher Learning Commission of North Central Association of Schools and Colleges. Those are the regional accreditors of the universities in the central 19 Midwestern state areas for higher education, and simply posed the idea, could Cleveland apply for accreditation, for regional accreditation? We had accreditation, programmatic accreditation with the Council on Chiropractic Education, but could Cleveland become accredited to offer those pre-professional sciences and lead towards a bachelor's degree in human biology? Because that would prepare the student to be able to graduate with a bachelor's degree in biology and a concurrent doctor's degree. The idea was actually patterned after the University of Missouri, Kansas City Medical School. What they would do, the med school, and they still do this today, it's a 6-year medical program. Take very bright students out of high school, they move them through the general education and the pre-health sciences and then right into a medical degree program. And so that medical graduate then graduates with a concurrent bachelor's degree and medical degree. It worked well for them. It's now working well for us. But then we noticed that many students who initially the students were chiropractic students or chiropractic bound students that would come into our undergraduate degree program. But then we started getting students that were pre-dental students and pre-osteopathic and pre-medical students. And it became very evident that this pre-health science bachelor's program was of value not only to chiropractic students, but to others. And, we have a registrar office and financial aid, and we have classrooms available in the evening that aren't used. And so we started to expand our educational offerings. To today, we have associate's degrees, master's degrees, and of course, then there's the Doctor of Chiropractic. The associate degrees are in biology, in exercise science, and rad tech. Students can come in to Cleveland, take a 2-year associate's degree leading to a certification in radiological technology, and they have jobs at hospitals and geriatric facilities and congregate care facilities. Just before they graduate, they're employed. So we're trying to address, of course, chiropractic is our flagship focus, but if we can use the infrastructure of this educational facility and our administrative facility to embrace additional workforce demand programs, then that diversifies the revenue of the institution, allows us to plow more money into the chiropractic degree program, among others. Most recently, we have a bachelor's degree, of course, the bachelor's degree in human biology, but a bachelor's degree in exercise science, in master's degree in exercise physiology and sports performance. Why did we add that degree? You see, the mission of the institution is to educate leaders in health promotion. And when we talk about health promotion, as you know this and as the listeners know this, it's about embracing behaviors that help people stay well. Good nutrition, exercise, healthcare behaviors like smoking, weight control, all of those issues, we know that evidence shows that health behaviors are key to longevity and quality of life. And so all of our programs are focused on the theme, in what way do they promote health? That's the vision of the institution. Why the master's degree with the focus on sports performance? I'm finding so many of our alumni become leaders in their local community, on local high school teams, even sports professional teams. We know that all 32 National Football Leagues have doctors of chiropractic as part of their training team. We know that now all of the major baseball leagues have doctors of chiropractic as part of their team. We see chiropractors in the Olympics. Our objective with this master's degree in sports performance is we've created a sports performance lab, and I'm eager for when you're on campus next to see where that is. It's in our fitness center. We carved out a piece of our 11,000 square foot fitness center to create a sports performance center. The first three focuses are to look at the biomechanics associated with golf swing, a baseball swing, and a soccer kick. And you may have seen this in other industries. We have vests and some apparatuses that the subject will put on, and they're electrodes that then are connected to, digitally connected to software materials where we can actually see on screen and in real time, the hip motion and the lower spine motion in the golf swing. And we can identify areas of inefficiency of the motion and the rotation of the hips. Then we establish the baseline. Then we take and adjust the patient based on the indications for care, and then bring them right back, hook the vest back up, see the outcome between baseline and after, pre and post, after the intervention of chiropractic care. Now, at the end of the day, chiropractic is about optimizing health. And what's exciting to me about that sports performance focus is it allows us to gather data about before and after chiropractic intervention on joint motion. And we see a next step, and there's a handful of studies that look at the fact or point to the fact that chiropractic care for a golf swing before and after can enhance the distance that one hits that ball. So for me, sports performance, number one, it's about assessing the outcome of chiropractic care. Beyond stiff neck and sore back, how do we enhance the mobility and the function, which then could translate to how to enhance the activities of daily living, which is our greater objective to restore function of the patients. So we're excited about that. And interestingly, a graduate could take the skills they learn through that master's degree, and actually they could go into their communities and they could buy the equipment for around $20,000, and they could start their own sports performance assessment. What we're doing, and we just opened this here in January of this year, of 2024, is we're reaching out to golf pros to invite clients to come in, because our objective is how can we enhance the effectiveness of their golf performance. And I'm not a golfer, but some of my friends are, and I'm amazed at how dedicated and how much time and money that people put into perfecting their golf swing. So there's an interesting entrepreneurial marketability of this sports performance focus. But for me, it's just one more way of measuring the outcome of what chiropractic is.
So hang tight, everyone, while we take about a 30-second break to hear from our sponsors. Welcome back to our podcast with the one and only Dr. Carl Cleveland. So Dr. Cleveland, as a founding member of the Chiropractic Summit, which I've been a part of, and the Council on Chiropractic Guidelines and Practice Parameters, which I've been a part of, you've played a pivotal role in shaping this profession. How do you see those two organizations contributing to the future of the profession, and what challenges do you anticipate in maintaining what we've talked about earlier, some consensus within the profession?
Well, as we acknowledge that not all chiropractors historically have converged on the same vision of what chiropractic is and where it fits in the system of healthcare. And we had grown up at a time of diversity within the profession. It was broad scope versus focus scope care, or mixer care versus straight care. I try to avoid those terms, straight versus mixer. Interesting story. My wife and I, Elizabeth, have been contributors for many years to the Kansas City Philharmonic Orchestra. And we would pay each year, and it entitles us to go to a dinner, a celebration. It's downtown Kansas City area at one of the hotels, and it's kind of a black tie event, and we always enjoyed those. This one year, this was just a few years back, and we go there and we go to a registration table, and they tell us what table we would sit at and table number, whatever that number is, and we'd find that table as people are assembling in the dining hall at that celebration for the Philharmonic Orchestra. There would be name plates. There are places, little name cards, and so we went with our accountant friends, and John and Dee, and while they knew about chiropractic, they didn't know the details of chiropractic, though they were chiropractic college patients. And so we find our seat, and I seat Elizabeth, and there was already a couple sitting next to us, and the woman said, well, and my place card said, Dr. Carl Carl Cleveland the third. And the woman said, I see you're a doctor. What type of a doctor are you? And I said, well, I'm a doctor of chiropractic. And she said, I love my chiropractor. My chiropractor changed my life. I had migraine headaches, and she just went on. And then she stopped. She said, but what type of a chiropractor are you? I thought, well, that's an unusual question. I said, well, I'm president of the Chiropractic College. And she said, no, are you a straight or are you a mixer? Now, I've heard that question asked to me by the public before, but it caught me off guard at that fundraising event for the Philharmonic Orchestra. Am I a straight or am I a mixer? And I got to thinking, what did John Sapinski and his wife, my accountant friend, think that woman just asked me? Was she asking me how I like my cocktails, or was she asking me my sexual persuasion? So this concept of straight and mixer, I just try to avoid that. I may talk about broad scope or focus scope, and there are many approaches to chiropractic, but the common denominator, in my opinion, is we're all putting motion into the spine, into the joints of the body, and we're restoring function. And we know the connection between the spine and the nervous system and the systemic influence the nervous system has on health. And back to your question about unifying the profession, what you have done with that group, and I'm honored to have been one of the founding members. I think going back maybe to I don't want to quote the date, but 2 decades probably back, when we started the Chiropractic Summit. And around that table, you had the Congress of Chiropractic State Associations, you had the ACA, you had the ICA, you had the Association of Chiropractic College Presidents, and various other groups and vendors that supported the profession, from foot levelers to standard process and others. And what I saw is, when you think about it, the people around that table, and if you add the constituencies they bring and that they represent, that Chiropractic Summit probably has the greatest, largest reach, even beyond the ACA and the ICA, because it was including the membership of the state associations. And to be meeting, we started once a year, that was twice a year, to bring all of those people together, looking towards the future of this profession. And you'll remember this, Dr. Ray, just prior to the election of the Obama administration, we saw that there's the opportunity to influence healthcare reform. And I can remember what I felt was probably one of the greatest accomplishments is we came together on a unified message as we go into the congressional arena in terms of defining chiropractic's role as part of the healthcare system. We were stepping in with a common message and a common voice. And that's not always been the case in this profession. And that's important.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I can recall stories from my mother and father. You know, they didn't license chiropractic in Mississippi until 1973, I believe it was. And I remember the stories of them trying to pass legislation, and we had people that were on opposite sides of the fence within the profession. And the governor back then basically told them to get the hell out of his office until they could come together and present one bill. Sometimes we can be our own worst enemies. You know, when you talk about the straight and the mixer, or philosophical versus more mechanistic. You know, when I like looking at other professions to see how they have evolved over time. And, you know, I hope that in time that there are recognized specialty. I know there are some now. Your diplomats in radiology and nutrition, things of that nature. But, you know, dentists, there are some that just fix teeth and are pain driven. There are some that are in cosmetic dentistry. There are some that are in reconstruction. But at the end of the day, they're all dentists. And
Sure.
and I truly hope in my lifetime that we truly evolve to realize that there is more than one way to practice chiropractic, and one size doesn't fit all. And if we could become more accepting of different perspectives and different approaches to practice, I think that'll help propel us in the future. So I want to pivot for just a minute. I know you wrote some pieces for the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress. And so you've always been involved in educating not only just the profession, but in educating the public about chiropractic and why it's critical to have a chiropractor on your healthcare team. What have you found to be the most effective strategy in communicating that message? And can you give me a couple of tidbits on how the average chiropractor on Main Street can advance public perception and recognition of care?
Well, this is an important theme to me because I have grown up in a chiropractic family. And chiropractic was our approach to health. The only intervention I had ever had with a medical doctor is if I had cut myself to the extent it needed to have sutures, or I needed a dental anesthetic to fill teeth. And growing up as a child, I can remember the first time that I realized that our approach to health was different than the others in the neighborhood. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. And on Saturday mornings in the spring, we'd play softball with the kids in the neighborhood. And I went up the street early on a Saturday morning and sat on the steps of a young girl named Phyllis Johnson. And Phyllis and I were in the same grade, but she came in from breakfast, and she sat down next to me on that cement step. And she said, "Carl, my dad says your dad's bad. My dad says your father's a quack." Well, I didn't understand that word. I mean, I knew it was an exclamation and a noise that a duck made, but I didn't understand it in that context. And I then, it wasn't very long, the kids in the neighborhood I'd be up to bat to swing at the ball, and they'd say, "Go Quactor C, go Quactor C." That was, kids will taunt one another. These were my friends. And that was my nickname all the way through high school. And of course, I go back and I asked my parents, why the disrespect? And they explained it, but I didn't understand it then at that time. But of course, I do now. And interestingly, and I'm answering your question, why is it important to message chiropractic in the marketplace? I can remember my senior year of high school, and this was November. I was at my grandmother's home. It was a Saturday, watching TV. TVs were black and white, and they were very small screens then in '63. And Walter Cronkite, CBS News reporter, I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention. And he said this. He said, "Today, at the Chicago offices of the American Medical Association, they established the Committee on Quackery with the sole purpose to contain and eliminate the profession of chiropractic." Now, I'm a high schooler. I wanted to be a biologist, wanted to be a zookeeper, remember? And, but I'm hearing this respected news reporter talking about containing and eliminating the profession that my family has been part of for generations. I went home that next morning and shared that with my father and mother, and they explained it to me. In fact, actually, because my father was on the board of directors of the ICA, they had a heads up that the AMA had established that. And so messaging, to me, when I run into people, and even today, it's far better, that people are confused about what chiropractic is and where it fits in the healthcare system. Another example, I was in graduate school. I was in chiropractic college, and simultaneously I was working on a graduate degree at the University of Kansas Medical Center, which you'll know where that was, Kansas City, maybe a 10-minute drive from the Cleveland Chiropractic College at that time. And I'm in grad school, and I was studying not medicine, but I was studying anatomy, and specifically neuroanatomy, because that was my interest. And I would be taking courses concurrently with the medical students. I came into neuroanatomy classes one day, and I see on the bulletin board an invitation, the Kansas Medical Society. The Kansas Medical Society invites all of the students to a free lunch during the lunch hour. Well, I was a graduate student and I was hungry, so I stayed for lunch. And the focus, this was 1973, the focus of this presentation was the Kansas Medical Society handed out a booklet. And the title of the booklet Chiropractic, the unscientific cult.
Wow.
And part of AMA's strategy to contain and eliminate chiropractic, in addition to media creating a disrespect and suspicion, they wanted to indoctrinate beginning medical students early on that chiropractic was a cult and it was hazardous to your health. I went up and talked to the dean, and after that, I said, well, can't we bring in a chiropractor to talk about chiropractic? Because I know these medical students ultimately will have patients that are also going to chiropractors. He sat back on his desk, on his chair. He folded his arms and he said, until you can bring me any shred of effectiveness of the outcome of chiropractic care, if you can do that, then I may consider your request. This was 1973.
Wow.
The Wilt case wasn't filed until 76. We didn't have the data. We had satisfied patients. We were just put into Medicare in 1972, not because of our research, but because of satisfied patients demanding that the Medicare patients being reimbursed for chiropractic. And I often wonder if I had that opportunity to talk to Dr. Hudson, the dean of that program, today, we have the evidence. You see, there are at least 5 dynamics moving this forward. The first 3 represent Withington and Berwick's triple aim. You may be familiar with the concept. They presented to Congress in 2008, advising Congress, saying, if you want to impact the quality of health in the United States, your decisions in terms of healthcare intervention should be driven by the simultaneously pursuit of 3 objectives, a triple aim. First, is there evidence that the procedure is effective? In other words, does it get results? Is there evidence of that? Number 2, does it save the system money? In other words, is it cost effective? And number 3, are the patients satisfied with the outcome of the care? Do they see it as a value? Well, right away, today, we have the evidence from even the guidelines from the American College of Physicians to our own, the Canadian Medical Association guidelines, even to our own Food and Drug Administration, saying the guidelines for pain management is first look to non-pharmacological approaches, and they list spinal manipulation, or they actually list chiropractic, and of course massage and acupuncture. So those are the first 3 of the 5 dynamics moving the profession forward. The 4th dynamic is the tragedy of the addiction to prescribed painkillers. I'm talking about prescribed drugs. We know the challenge that's there, and that addiction is what has driven the medical system to have to look at a non-pharmaceutical approach to pain management. And here we are. The 5th dynamic moving the profession forward is the aging baby boomer. And when you think about it, my image of old age when I was in a college was 65 years old on the front porch in a rocking chair. Today, the image of old age, 85 years old on a Carnival singles cruise. There are new attitudes about aging. People are starting new careers. Did you happen to see the halftime show on Thanksgiving? It was the Dallas Cowboys, and was it the team that says from Washington? They have a new name now, I think. It was Dally Dazzle Dallas.
Yeah.
Do you remember? 77 years old, and she's out there in the cheerleaders. I mean, when you look, do you remember that rock group from the 1970s in the Rolling Stones?
I do.
That was the name. They're now in their 70s and they're still touring.
Still rocking and rolling.
I mean, here you have Willie Nelson, 90 years old, still on the road. My point is, what profession is better positioned to help those aging boomers move into their golden years, to maintain balance, pain-free mobility, and function? What better profession than chiropractic? This is our finest hour. I grew up at a time when a knock at the door brought fear of arrest. And today, we're walking through the doors of Congressional Health Services on Hospital Hill, on Capitol Hill. We're in the Department of Defense, the Department of Veterans Affairs. Here in this city, Kansas City, there are 11 hospitals that have affiliated chiropractic clinics where chiropractic care is provided. And we're seeing that across the country. There's never been a better time to be in this profession But we can never lose sight of the struggle and the sweat and the sacrifice of the pioneers of this profession. So
I agree.
well, let me close and make this statement. I went to my 50th high school reunion, and I was so hopeful to see Bobby Zajic. He was one of my buddies in high school that called me Quactor C, but he wasn't there. And I was so happy. I was hopeful to see Phyllis Johnson, the little girl who called my father a quack, and she wasn't there either. And I was very disappointed because if Bobby had been there, I would have gone up and shaken his hand, and I would say, "Thank you, Bobby, for calling me Quactor C." If Phyllis had been there, I would have gone up, given her the biggest hug, say, "Phyllis, thank you for calling my father a quack." I would thank them for lighting the fire in my belly to do all I can to bring the image of this profession in line with the reality of today's practice of chiropractic. And we've got to prepare our graduates. You see, the science and the evidence, it doesn't advocate for ourselves, for itself. We have to go out and advocate and send a clear message of where chiropractic fits in the system. And that's why the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress is so important. It's about messaging. And people will stop me, and as I'm talking about what chiropractic is, I was invited not long ago to speak to the Kansas Medical Corps, and they wanted to know what are the indications for chiropractic care because they're seeing the benefits, they're seeing the guidelines, and they see patients that are going to chiropractors. And so I'm talking about that with that group. But I always start that doctors of chiropractic, they're healthcare professionals for the diagnosis, care, and prevention of functional disorders of the spine and other parts of the musculoskeletal system. The focus of chiropractic is on maintaining proper spinal function, its relationship to the nervous system, and the patient's good health. In other words, I start with that soundbite because if you stop 10 patients on the street and say, "Why would you go to a chiropractor?" Most are going to go for spine or neck pain. So let's meet them where they are in their thinking. And then
Right.
as they become patients, we can explain the broader impact of why that function and ongoing regular care and maintaining the mobility and the relationship between the spine and the nervous system, that can be part of the future discussion. So messaging is important.
No, no doubt about it. So I've got some just for fun question. Who's your hero and why?
Well, I'd have to say my father. And as a teenager, I found out the older I got, the smarter he got. And sometimes when I'm confronted with a complex decision, I will reflect and say, well, what would my father do in this context? So I'd have to say my hero is my father. He was, you knew him. He could spellbound a crowd. He'd step up to the microphone, he'd start to talk, and the room would hush. He was quite the speaker, quite the communicator. So he's my hero.
So what do you think you'd be doing today if you weren't doing what you're doing? You'd
Well,
have
it's a
your
good thing.
suit?
It's good thing. It's a good thing that I couldn't sing because I might have stayed in music. One of my close buddies that he played saxophone in the band that I worked with. This goes back to the 60s and the 70s. And he passed away, and I went to his funeral, and there's all these old musicians coming out of the walls, and I get to look, and most of them didn't pay into many of them did not pay into Social Security. They just took cash at the end of the day, and they, substance abuse took its toll. And I got to thinking, I am so fortunate that I did not follow
that you
music
couldn't.
as a career. And again, there wasn't a big market for somebody that collected snakes and turtles. So
No doubt.
so Dad,
I tell you what's been interesting to me is, and I'm a former musician, played in the band, did the whole bit, found out that's not a good way to make a living when you're married and got a little kid. But I'm really amazed at how many chiropractors have been musicians or are involved in music. And I don't know if it's the tactile part of it that just kind of translates into what we do or what, but there's an awful lot of them. No doubt about it.
That is the case. We should probably have at the next Cleveland homecoming event have everybody bring their instruments. What was your instrument, Ray?
Guitar, trombone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I play
Yeah.
guitar and keyboard, piano.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't
And
know if you recall, but at our graduation party, we had you join us on stage and play some songs with us. I believe we were at Todd Elder's home.
I do remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that. That was the
Yeah.
after party that you
That was
invited
the
me
after
to.
party. Yeah.
I was the
No.
only one there wearing a tie. It was right after graduation. Do you remember? But
Yeah.
see, music's been important to me. That's how I met my beautiful wife, Elizabeth. Elizabeth played piano in church, and I played piano in nightclubs.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks for spending some time with me today, Dr. Cleveland, and thank you all for listening to the ChiroSphere podcast. Please subscribe and share the podcast with your friends and let us know who you'd like to hear from in the future and what topics you'd like us to cover, and we'll do our best to deliver. If you want to learn more about ChiroHealth USA and how we can help you develop a compliant, profitable discount strategy that will absolutely grow your practice, income, and profitability, call us at 888-719-9990. or visit our website at chusa.com. That's how you spell Chusa, to find out why ChiroHealth USA is the network that works for chiropractic and you. Thanks again, Dr. Cleveland.
Thank you. My privilege.